Kaydee tried to kiss Shadow. Could this be the start of a new chapter? For just a second, their beaks came together. Kaydee leaned towards Shadow. Shadow stayed close, and from the camera angle, the moment looked almost impossibly sweet. Beak to beak. Close enough that some viewers immediately saw something else. A kiss. Even a tiny heart forming between their faces, of course. Bald eagles do not kiss in the human sense. What Kaydee appeared to be doing was closer to nibbling, touching, or investigating around Shadow's beak and feathers. But that scientific distinction did almost nothing to stop the reaction. Because after weeks of Kaydee appearing around Shadow, following him, calling near him, visiting his nest, and slowly becoming a familiar presence in his territory, this was different. This time, she was not simply nearby. She moved directly into his personal space. And for everyone wondering where this relationship might be going, that tiny beak-to-beak moment suddenly felt much bigger than it looked. But then Shadow reacted, and what happened next made the moment even more interesting. Because this was not a simple love story. Not yet. Kaydee moved closer. Shadow pulled away. Then he came back, and that may tell us far more than a single kiss ever could. Could this really be the beginning of a new chapter at Big Bear? Or are we watching two eagles slowly figuring each other out in real time? Because right now, the answer may be somewhere in between. Kaydee has become one of the most persistent new characters in Shadow's world. When she first began appearing around Big Bear, there was no guarantee she would stay. Young bald eagles travel. They explore, they investigate territories and food sources. They appear for a while and sometimes disappear just as quickly. Big Bear itself gives an eagle plenty of reasons to visit. There is water, food, tall trees, safe perches, and of course, an established nest. So, Kaydee's first appearances did not necessarily mean anything about Shadow. But then she returned, and returned again and again. That is where the story began to change. Kaydee was not simply passing through one location. She was repeatedly moving through places Shadow already used. Sometimes she arrived at the nest, sometimes she appeared on nearby perches, sometimes the two exchanged vocalizations, sometimes Shadow left, and Kaydee followed. Slowly, an eagle who began as an unknown visitor started becoming something else. Familiar, and familiarity is where almost every interesting relationship in the wild begins. Not with a dramatic declaration, not with a single magical moment, but with repetition. Being in the same place, seeing the same individual again, learning how close you can stand, learning how the other animal responds, learning when to approach and when to back away. Kaydee and Shadow appear to be doing exactly that, and lately, their interactions have become much harder to dismiss as simple coincidence. One of the most revealing moments came at the nest. Kaydee was already there, doing something viewers have increasingly seen her do. She was interacting with the nest material, moving sticks, pulling at branches, testing pieces of the structure. At first, Shadow was more observer than participant. That alone is interesting. He could leave, he could force her away, he could refuse to remain in the same area. Instead, Shadow stayed close enough to watch. Kaydee continued. Then Shadow eventually moved back toward the nest activity. And for a brief period, both eagles were involved around the sticks. Nothing about that proves they are building a nest together as a bonded pair. That would be too strong, but emotionally, it was difficult not to notice the change. Kaydee was doing something in a place deeply associated with Shadow's territory, and Shadow was no longer simply somewhere else. He was there with her, two eagles, one nest, one shared activity, and then Kaydee pushed the interaction a little further. She moved toward Shadow, not toward the sticks, not toward another branch. Toward him, her beak came close to his. She appeared to nibble or touch around Shadow's beak and feathers, and suddenly the entire scene changed. It stopped looking like two eagles working in the same nest. It looked personal. To human eyes, almost affectionate. That is the moment many people would describe simply as, she tried to kiss him. And as long as we understand that kiss is human shorthand rather than a scientific description, it captures exactly why the footage feels so intimate. Kaydee was initiating contact. Shadow was the one receiving it, and his reaction mattered. He did not simply lean in and turn the scene into a perfect romantic moment. Instead, Shadow appeared less receptive. He shifted, he created space. At one point, he moved away toward the front portion of the nest, for viewers hoping for an instant fairy tale pairing. That might sound disappointing, but I think it makes the story far more interesting because relationships between wild animals are not written for us. They do not move according to the emotional timeline we want. Kaydee can approach. Shadow can say, in the only way an eagle can. That is close enough for now. And then both can continue interacting later. That is exactly what makes this feel real. In the comments section, some viewers saw sweetness immediately. Others noticed something more cautious. Several specifically argued that the close beak moment should not be interpreted as proof that Shadow was returning Kaydee's apparent affection. And that disagreement is actually perfect for this story, because both groups are watching the same thing. Kaydee clearly moved close. Shadow clearly reacted. The mystery is what those reactions mean over time. A single frame can look like a kiss. A few seconds later can look like rejection. But an eagle relationship cannot be understood from either frame alone. The pattern matters, and Shadow did something after creating distance that deserves attention. He came back. That may be the detail I find most fascinating. Shadow could move away from Kaydee without ending the interaction entirely. He could establish a boundary and then return to the same shared space. Think about the difference. A complete rejection would look very different. If Shadow consistently drove Kaydee out, if every close approach ended with her being chased away, if he refused to tolerate her near the nest, we would have a much clearer story. But that is not what viewers keep seeing. Instead, the relationship appears more complicated. Kaydee approaches. Shadow sometimes tolerates her. Sometimes he creates distance. Kaydee returns. Shadow remains somewhere nearby. Then another interaction happens. It is not instant romance, it is negotiation. And from a behavioral perspective, negotiation can be more meaningful than a perfect-looking moment. It suggests both animals are learning the boundaries of the relationship. How close, for how long, in which places, during which activities, and perhaps most importantly, what happens after one of them says enough? Do they separate completely, or do they reconnect? With Kaydee and Shadow, the answer lately appears to be they reconnect. We have seen that pattern beyond the nest too. Shadow takes off. Kaydee follows, and not always long afterward. On more than one documented occasion, Kaydee has left only seconds after Shadow. That detail has become so noticeable that even official Big Bear updates have joked about Shadow having a shadow. It is easy to romanticize that she cannot stay away from him. She always wants to be wherever Shadow goes. Those are fun human interpretations. But the observed behavior itself is interesting enough without adding anything. One eagle leaves. The other follows almost immediately, and then it happens again on another day. That is how patterns begin. Not because we assign a romantic explanation, but because repetition tells us the association is worth watching. Kaydee is paying attention to Shadow's movements. At minimum, he is becoming relevant to her decisions, and every time she follows, the same question returns. Why him? Why now? Why does she keep choosing the same direction? We do not know yet, but we know she keeps doing it. Then there are the calls. Those morning chortles and vocal exchanges may not look as dramatic as beak-to-beak contact, but they matter, because communication is another layer of familiarity. The most powerful thing about Kaydee and Shadow right now is not one behavior. It is the accumulation. They perch nearby. They appear around the same trees. They visit the nest. They vocalize. Kaydee follows Shadow after takeoff. She interacts with the nest material. Shadow sometimes joins. And now, Kaydee has moved close enough to touch around his beak and feathers. Each event alone has several possible explanations. Together, they begin creating a storyline. Not a confirmed pair bond. Not yet, but a relationship that is becoming increasingly difficult to describe as two completely unrelated strangers sharing the same landscape, and the viewers feel it. Words like heart, love, together, mate, and future appear repeatedly when people talk about Shadow and Kaydee. Some viewers even noticed that the shape created when their beaks came together looked like a heart. That reaction tells us something important. People are no longer simply watching Kaydee. They are watching Kaydee and Shadow as a pair of characters, not necessarily as a confirmed eagle pair, but as two individuals whose interactions now matter because of the other one. When Kaydee moves a stick, people ask what Shadow will do. When Shadow flies away, people watch to see whether Kaydee follows. When Kaydee approaches him, people study his reaction. When they call, viewers wonder if they are answering each other. That is the real change. Their behavior has become connected in the minds of the audience because increasingly, the footage itself keeps connecting them. And perhaps that is what a new chapter actually means. It does not require eggs. It does not require mating. It does not require us to declare Kaydee Shadow's new partner. A chapter can begin long before we know how it ends. Maybe the first page is simply this. Kaydee keeps coming back. Shadow keeps allowing another encounter, then another, then another. Kaydee tests the distance between them. Shadow sets a boundary. Kaydee does not disappear. Shadow comes back. That is a story. A very early one, but a story nonetheless. There is also something almost charmingly human about the imbalance between them right now. Kaydee often seems like the bolder one. She explores, she approaches, she investigates. She pushes closer. Shadow often seems more measured. He watches, he responds. Sometimes he joins, sometimes he creates space if we turn them into human characters for just a moment. It might look like this. Kaydee! Hey, Shadow, I see you. Kaydee, what are you doing? Shadow, standing here. Kaydee, can I stand closer? Shadow, maybe. Kaydee, what about closer than that? Shadow, no, Kaydee. Okay, I'll be back. And somehow she is, again and again. Obviously, eagles are not having that conversation in human language, but the pattern of approach. Response, distance, and return is exactly why viewers find them so entertaining. There is tension, there is uncertainty, there is personality in the behavior, even when we remain careful about assigning human motives. And there is progress, not always forward, but progress in familiarity. That distinction matters. Progress does not necessarily mean romance. Sometimes progress simply means tolerance. Sometimes it means trust around shared space. Sometimes it means one eagle becomes predictable enough that the other no longer reacts as strongly. Those changes can eventually become part of pair formation, or they may never go that far. That is why the coming months will be so important. As breeding season approaches, the evidence we should watch becomes more specific. Do Shadow and Kaydee continue spending increasing amounts of time together? Does nest work become more coordinated? Does Shadow begin initiating interactions rather than mainly responding? Do they defend areas together? Do vocal exchanges become more consistent? Does Kaydee remain in the territory? And perhaps one of the most interesting questions of all, will Shadow begin closing the distance himself? Because right now, Kaydee appears to be doing much of the emotional heavy lifting in the story. She follows, she returns, she explores, she approaches. She even gave viewers the moment that looked like a kiss. But if this relationship is truly changing, eventually we should expect the story to give Shadow his own move. Not a human declaration of love, something simpler. A deliberate approach, a shared perch he chooses, a coordinated nest visit, a response that he initiates, a moment where Kaydee is not the one closing the distance. That could become one of the most revealing clues yet. And perhaps we are already beginning to see small pieces of that. Shadow returns to the nest after moving away. He remains around Kaydee. He participates in shared nest activity. He does not permanently remove himself from her presence. Again, none of that proves romance, but it gives us something more important than a romantic fantasy. It gives us evidence to keep watching, and that is why this story works so well. The question is still open. There is another reason the kiss moment matters, not because it proves anything, but because Kaydee took a social risk. She moved close enough for Shadow to respond. And he did. In wild animals, those tiny negotiations can define relationships. Approach, response, adjustment. Try again later. It may look subtle compared with dramatic fights or courtship flights, But sometimes the quietest interactions tell us the most. Two eagles touching beaks for a second can contain an enormous amount of information. Who initiated? Who moved away? How quickly? What happened afterward? Did either bird leave the territory? Did they return to the same space? That last question may be the most important. Because whatever happened during Kaydee, affectionate-looking approach, it did not end their association. They were still part of each other a day afterward, and that is exactly why the word new matters more than the word love. New means unfinished. New means uncertain. New means we are allowed to watch without knowing. Maybe Kaydee's beak-to-beak moment will eventually become one tiny early scene in a much larger partnership. Maybe months from now, people will look back and say, that was when things really started to change. Or maybe it will remain exactly what it was. A young eagle testing boundaries with another eagle she had become familiar with. Both possibilities are worth watching. Because the beauty of this story is that nobody knows the final answer yet. Not the people watching the cameras, not the people studying the behavior, and certainly not us. Nature is still writing it. For some viewers, that uncertainty makes every small interaction feel enormous. A stick moved together, a call answered from another tree. A 2-second delay before Kaydee follows Shadow into the sky. A shared perch, a nibble near his feathers. A beak touching another beak, small things. But relationships in nature are often built from small things. Repeated often enough, small things become patterns. Patterns become familiarity. Familiarity can become tolerance. Tolerance can become coordination. And sometimes, coordination becomes partnership. We are somewhere near the beginning of that chain. Exactly where, we do not know, but we are close enough to see it happening. That may be why viewers are already talking about the future. Some openly hope Shadow and Kaydee eventually become mates. Others are already imagining future eaglets, even while acknowledging that no one knows what will happen. And then there are the cautious viewers. There's the ones saying, not so fast. Shadow pulled away. He did not clearly reciprocate. Do not turn one photograph into a romance. They are right too. In fact, we need both groups. The hopeful viewers tell us why these moments matter emotionally. The cautious viewers remind us to keep watching the actual birds. And somewhere between those two reactions is probably the best place to understand Shadow and Kaydee. Hopeful, but observant. Romantic, but not certain. So did Kaydee really try to kiss Shadow in the human sense? No one can say that, but did she move into unusually intimate beak-to-beak contact that looked incredibly affectionate to the people watching? Yes. Did Shadow immediately turn it into a perfect romantic response? No. He appeared to establish some distance. Did that distance end their relationship also? No. Shadow came back. Kaydee stayed part of the picture, the nest activity continued, the shared territory continued, the following continued, the calls continued. And that may be the part worth remembering. Not the kiss itself, what came after it, because anyone can freeze one beautiful second. The real story begins when the camera keeps rolling. Kaydee approaches, Shadow reacts. The moment breaks. For a second, maybe the romantic interpretation disappears. Then Shadow returns, they are beside each other again. And suddenly, the question becomes even more interesting than before. Maybe this is not a love story yet. Maybe it is something better for us to watch. The beginning of one possibility. Two eagles learning each other. One bold, one cautious. One frequently closing the distance. The other deciding moment by moment how much distance he is willing to give up. And neither one has left the story. Tomorrow, Kaydee may follow Shadow again, or she may spend time alone at the nest. Shadow may join her, or he may choose another tree. She may move close, he may step away. Then perhaps one day, the pattern changes. Maybe Shadow approaches first. Maybe he lands beside Kaydee instead of the other way around. Maybe they begin working the nest with a rhythm that looks less accidental and more coordinated. Maybe another beak-to-beak moment happens. And this time, Shadow does not pull away. That would not automatically prove everything, but it would be one more page. And right now, that is what everyone is waiting for, the next page. So perhaps the question should not be, are Shadow and Kaydee already a couple? that asks nature to give us an answer too early? Instead, are they becoming more important to each other? That is a question the footage can actually begin to answer. Kaydee's repeated returns suggest Shadow, and this territory continued to matter to her. Shadow's continued tolerance and repeated presence give Kaydee opportunities to return. The nest gives them a place where their behavior can overlap. Their calls connect them across distance, their flights connect them through movement, and now their beaks have connected too, for only a moment. But sometimes one moment is all it takes to make people realize they are watching something change. Kaydee leaned closer. Shadow reacted. He moved away. Then he came back. It was awkward, sweet, uncertain, and strangely perfect for where their story is right now. Not a finished romance. Not a confirmed pair. Just two bald eagles who seem to be spending more and more of their days inside the same story. And maybe that is what a new chapter really looks like at the beginning. Not fireworks, not certainty, not an instant happily ever after. A young eagle moving a little closer. A cautious eagle deciding whether to stay. A brief touch of two beaks, and then there's another meeting tomorrow. So the next time Kaydee finds Shadow, watch carefully. Watch who moves first, watch who follows, watch who calls, watch who returns to the nest, and especially, watch the distance between them. Because if this really is the beginning of a new chapter at Big Bear, the next clue may not be dramatic at all. It may simply be the moment Shadow finally decides not to move away.